Welcome to part 3 of my gemstone tutorial. As you can see, I've kind of gone halfway through the second layer of the gemstone, and in this tutorial we will finish up that second layer and then go over and do the fine details. So for those of you who have watched part 1 and 2, you know that I tend to work the first layer, which is laying down the very basic colors and shapes so I know where everything is, and then the second layer is deepening and rich and making those colors really rich and blending them. So that's what we're doing here, and I'm just working on the sort of dark parts at the bottom of the gemstone with the browns here. And even though I'm not using the grid so much anymore, because I use the grid in the first part when I'm laying down the shapes, and then basically all where I need to put the colors is already sort of filled in, so I don't need to use the grid. I still work fairly methodically up and down the drawing, and I find that really helps me sort of not get super lost in the drawing, and also keeps a nice rhythm going. That's my preference of how I work. I will be putting a list of all the pencils that I used in this drawing in the description of the video on my Patreon page, so don't worry about trying to follow too closely with every little pencil that's coming in and out. I know it's quite quick, but again, most oranges, browns. You'll notice I haven't used a lot of black so far. I tend to wait to use black until the very, very end. And I like to think of it a little bit like if I don't have to use black, I'd rather not. We tend to think of when there's shadows in any drawing, we should be putting blacks or grays in there, but most often shadows are the colors. They're just different shades of the colors that we've already been using. So even when I'm doing pet portraits, I usually wait to darken the blacks right until the very end when I'm looking, say, at the pupil of an eye or the really dark fur under a dog's ear. I might, I will use black, and I do use it a fair bit, but I usually wait until the very end, and you'll see that in this video. So I've used it a little bit throughout, but mostly I'm just using browns and being, very liberal with how much color I put in, and you can certainly see the difference between the first layer and this layer with how deep and rich those colors are. And every little piece of this drawing has multiple colors layered on top of one another to get that truly rich, realistic view of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the brand of pencil that I'm using. So I will, as I said, I'll list the colors, but I want to focus a little bit on the pencils and the paper that I'm actually using. And I use Faber-Castell Polychromos. They are a very popular pencil, and I originally started out using Prismacolor Premier, and I do really, really like those pencils. Recently, over the last year or so, I've switched to Faber-Castell, and they are great pencils. I love them for everything, but they're really, really good for gemstones. And the reason is there's just, from the pencils that I've used, nothing compares with the pigments and the colors that you can get from them. I talked a little bit in video 2 about not being afraid of color. And in gemstones, this is particularly important because gemstones are vibrant, they're colorful, that's why we love them, why we wear them and make jewelry out of them. So I wanted to mention this here just because you can see that really, really vibrant red and orange in the top right corner of the gemstone that I just sort of finished. That, you really have to be able to have those pigments come through to make that really shine. It's not to say you can't do that with a different line of pencils, but I find the Faber-Castell Polychromos are really good for that. And the paper that I'm using is Strathmore Mixed Media Vellum Surface, which I went over a little bit in the first video, but I didn't really talk about why I use that paper. When you're using colored pencil, you do want to have a bit of tooth to the paper. It's that tooth that allows the pencil to get in between the ridges, and you can build up layers, and that's how you get, you know, the ability to blend lots of different colors and put multiple layers over top of one another to get a very rich drawing. So I like the mixed media paper because it's got enough tooth that you can layer, but not so much that the tooth is interfering with the drawing itself, which I don't prefer. So that's the materials that I used and why I used them, and I wanted to bring that up now just because you know, the amount of color in this gemstone is really daunting, and having a pencil that can reflect that makes everything so much easier. So I'm just finishing up the last little bit of the second layer now, and this reflection in particular is quite blue in the reference photo, but the blue kind of fades into the other colors. So I wasn't quite sure how it would work, whether the blue would kind of look like it was going over top of the gem, like a reflection would, or whether it would just kind of blend with the colors beneath it. And again, I actually really like the Polychromos for this because they're hard enough that they don't blend super easily unless you know, continuously layer or you're burnishing. So I was able to get that effect of a reflection over top of other colors without it just looking kind of like a soupy mess, which I was a little worried about, and I've had some experience with that with the Prismacolor Premier. So you can see me kind of just doing the little soft outline of the reflection. I will go back and make that a lot darker blue. So I now have finished the second layer, and after I've got the second layer, I usually go and erase all my grid marks and all the other pencil marks that are around the drawing. So as I'm drawing, my hand inevitably smudges some of the pencil onto the surrounding drawing, so you could see me erasing some of that there. And this is what I was talking about before, where now I come back with black and really deepen those dark spots. So even though after the second layer it looks pretty good, I'm missing some of that contrast that I want in my drawings. So most of what I'm doing in this third layer, when I'm doing the details, is finalizing those black spaces, darkening, and adding in really, really fine details. In a gemstone, there's a lot of bigger details, but not necessarily a lot of really fine details. When I'm doing a pet portrait, there's a lot more kind of fine hairs that I do in the third layer. But in this drawing, it's mostly just darkening those spots, making sure I've got the contrast right. And then I get to work on the shadow. And shadows are always my least favorite part of a drawing. I am terrified of messing them up. But I have gotten a lot better at shadows with gemstones over my work with them. And one of the really important things to remember when you're doing a gemstone drawing is, because gemstones are transparent, your shadow is going to be colored, and quite heavily colored. So I do usually do a base of gray, and then I go over it with the specific color. And here I've got some little shoots of color from some of the facets. And that's the final drawing. Obviously it's been edited a little bit on the computer because the lighting from my video isn't quite what it looks like in person. But you can see it's very bright, it's very detailed, and hopefully you learned something about either drawing gemstones or colored pencils. And thanks so much for watching. I'll be putting out some more tutorials on some animal portrait related things for later this month, so keep an eye out for those.